If you've been a fan of Thomas for a while now, you might be aware of the many different eras the show has gone through. These include the hit era, nitrogen era, and so on. However, none are more beloved than the classic era, more commonly known as the classic series. What makes this era of Thomas so special is that the episodes were actually adaptations of stories found in the Railway series, written by the Reverend W. Awdry. Or well, most of them were. Yeah, so back in season 3, Britt Allcroft and her team started to experiment and started to make their own episodes to the dismay of Awdry. You see, they had a contract that said they could only make episodes based on stories that Awdry and his son Christopher wrote. The episodes found in season 3 were adaptations of annual stories that they would expand on, which were written by some random guy named Andrew Brenner. Don't know who that guy is, I'm sure he won't be important later. However, he was uncredited in all of these adaptations. In season 4, they decided to honor the contract again. However, they rewrote an entire story to remove any references to the real-life engine it was based on, which Awdry was very upset about.
No.
Even though these two were partners, they didn't always get along, which is why when Awdry passed away in 1997, Britt and her team ignored the Railway series, and from this point forward, they decided that they were in charge of Thomas and Friends, and took no restrictions. Look, I always found this a bit off because, well, within a year, they were hard at work making episodes that really wouldn't fit the tone of the Railway series. They kept the stories mostly realistic moving forward, but since they started doing their own thing, we started to miss out on some of the really cool characters and stories that we could have gotten adapted. Which is why today, I want to show you what the final 3 seasons of the classic series could have looked like if they just honored Awdry's contract. Now, I want to make it very clear, I actually really like a lot of the episodes produced during these last 3 seasons. I even like Magic Railroad, but I'm delusional and I want to live in an alternate universe where we could have seen what Awdry's classic era could have looked like. So, let's start with Awdry's season 5. I'm gonna get a lot of flack for this, but season 5 isn't my favorite season. But it has some really great episodes. I think to start off this revamp of the classic series, we need a good introduction story, which is why I chose Stop Thief as the season premiere. This is the first story that Christopher wrote, so I think it would be a great place to start off the season. Then, for the next 4 episodes, I would pick them to be based off the stories we see in James and the Diesel Engines. I know what you're thinking, why did I just skip over the rest of the really useful engine stories? Well, in case you don't know, most of those stories were adapted in season 4, and I feel like it makes more sense to sprinkle in the remaining 2 stories. The James stories, I feel, make sense to show up after Stop Thief, since their books released back to back. However, I feel like if this season was real, Deep Freeze would be saved for the last episode, since they tend to leave the winter-based episodes towards the end. Next, we would move on to Mavis and the Lorry, and Toby Takes the Road. 2 very basic stories that aren't really too interesting. I have them listed as separate stories, but maybe they could pull a special attraction. Our 8th episode of the season would see the much beloved triple header finally get its adaptation. I'm honestly surprised that they chose Mind That Bike over this one. Actually, come to think of it, why would they even adapt Mind That Bike? Like, don't get me wrong, love Tom Tipper, he is the GOAT. However, really? Over the story where Thomas, Duck, and Percy pull the express? Anyways, in this alternate reality, we would get to see this story adapted with the actual props, like how we should have gotten in the original series. Who knows, maybe this would mean everyone wouldn't feel like they need to adapt the story. The next 4 stories would be adaptations of the stories we find in Thomas and the Twins. Honestly, such an underrated book. I love Bill and Ben, and not only do we get to see more of them, we also get to see more of Edward's branch line in general. We even get a story with Trevor. Ever since season 6, Bro was relegated to just a cameo role in the background, so he'd finally get a speaking role, at least until season 20 comes around. Next, we move on to the most beloved Christopher book, Gordon the High-Speed Engine. Such a great book, showing Gordon deal with the fact that he's just getting old and soon he won't be able to keep up with the newer engines. However, he ultimately proves that he's got more in him. I would love to see this one adapted, and I feel like the season 5 visuals would be a great touch for this one. And how do you follow up 4 back-to-back stories focused on Gordon? Well, you give Henry the spotlight for a change. Henry and the Express is the next book adapted. I'm gonna be real with y'all, I always forget this book is real. Like, I never see people say, oh my god, sliding scale sweeps, all fiction. Maybe with this adaptation, we would finally see some people hyping up this book. Then, to close out season 5, we are going to take a trip to the narrow gauge railway with the adaptation of Great Little Engines. My only hope is that for Pop Special, they rework it so it makes sense for it to star Duncan, or just replace him with like Rheneas or someone else. I'd say Peter Sam, but he already has a starring role. I also feel like they would remove any mention of the Tallyling Railway, and just say Sir Handel went off to the mainland. And that is season 5. I wanted to keep it very basic since the season prior introduced a whole bunch of new characters, so I imagine spending as little money as possible would benefit them. The new characters this season would be Old Stuck-Up, the Works Diesel, Pip, and Emma. I imagine the Class 40 prop could be reworked into Old Stuck-Up, with another already existing Diesel being the Works Diesel. I like to see this as sort of a sequel to season 3. A big focus on the main line, with some areas like Edward's branch line and the narrow gauge line getting some time in the spotlight. However, with season 5 done, let's move on to season 6, which I'm sure many of you will enjoy. Season 2 introduced us to Diesels and showed us all different parts of Sodor like Edward's branch line. Season 4 went ahead and introduced a whole new railway in the Skarloey Railway. So what will season 6 have? Well, let's start off by introducing some fan favorites. The season 6 premiere is an adaptation of Ballast. That's right, in this universe, season 6 will introduce the Arlesdale Railway. Some of you may already be aware of this, but the narrow gauge engines caused the model builders a lot of stress due to how small they were. So how are we supposed to make engines even smaller? Simple, they don't. Simply make the engines the same scale as the narrow gauge engines, maybe even a little bigger. All they would need to do is make the engines who interact them like Duck bigger, like the pack scale engines. I can see them making pack scale models for the engines who work on the Little Western. Like I said, they just saved some money with season 5 so they can splurge, and in this timeline, they don't have to worry about making all the pack characters since they don't exist. Now you might be wondering to yourself, Being, why are you making up scenarios in your head? And to that I say, don't you remember what I said at the start? I am delusional! Anyways, the small railway engines would be adapted in the early 2000s instead of 2015. And what better way to follow that up than with Jock the New Engine? We get more of the small engines similar to how the first half of season 4 was all narrow gauge focused. Then, to round out this half of the season, we have Wilbert the Forest Engine, my favorite Christopher book. This book also transitions us over to the standard gauge railway, since in Wired Up, he visits the small engines. This wraps up the first half of season 6. A brand new railway is shown off and introduced to us, and we also get a very clean transition into the standard gauge episodes, thanks to a book all about a real life engine. So pretty much, we're just straight up copying season 4 bar to bar. However, that isn't the only surprise season 6 has, since the next story arc takes us into the real world. That's right, the next book getting adapted is Thomas and the Great Railway Show, one of the coolest concepts for a story, and it's pretty obvious why it was never adapted. It would be interesting to see how they would adapt it since they love removing all references to the real world in their episodes. If they were to do that, having episodes take place entirely in England would be tricky. Then to end out the season, we would of course have Thomas Comes Home. You can't adapt the Great Railway Show without adapting this one. These 4 stories would make up the last 4 episodes of season 6. If you notice, this season is only 20 episodes instead of the usual 24. This is because there's not enough material for 2 24 seasons. So, this one and season 7 are only 20 episodes. The final episode with this one will also continue the tradition of the last episode being a winter-themed episode. And that is a wrap on season 6. This season introduces the Arlesdale Railway, and we get to see the mainland for the first time. Honestly, this season has some really great stories. I get that a lot of people don't like Christopher's stories, but come on. Seeing the Wilbert stories remade with the models would just be magical. Finally, we reach the end of the classic series. Season 7 in real life is one of the most divisive parts of the whole show. I know there are many who just can't stand it, but personally, I quite enjoy it. This season in our new timeline I feel is also kind of a spiritual successor to Season 4, and even Season 6 with the way it's structured. Our first story getting adapted this season is none other than Mountain Engines. The Coley Fell Railway is probably the most forgettable railway on Sodor, so I feel like it's important that they get their chance to shine with the rest of Wilbert's creations on the big screen. Like legitimately, I recently forgot about this book until I ordered a Lord Harry Ertl off eBay last month. All 4 stories would be adapted with the arc ending with episode 4, Scaling the Mountain. Look, I don't think they'd keep the name Devil's Back, so this acts as kind of a placeholder. Very safe and generic. And since we would have already encountered the Skarloey Railway, why not stay with them for a bit? So jumping way far in the Railway series timeline, we have New Little Engine. This book's only goal was to introduce Ivo Hugh to the series, who does absolutely nothing. You know, people hate characters like Billy because they were only created to sell toys, but Ivo Hugh was literally made for no real purpose. He is nothing but a gimmick that goes nowhere. Concord had more of an impact on the world than Ivo Hugh. God, that's sure to date this video, but anyways, the stories in this book aren't the craziest, just very generic stories involving the narrow gauge engines. These stories fit perfectly here since the season 6 and 7 narrow gauge stories are kind of the era's low point. Also, I don't know when I'll ever get a chance to bring this up, but since we're talking about season 6 and 7 narrow gauge stories, let me share some trauma. So as mentioned in my most recent headcanon video, I am allergic to nuts. And I found this out while the episode Rusty Saves the Day was playing. Legitimately, every time I see that episode and this specific shot plays, I hear my mom telling me I can't eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Guess me and Skarloey both had a bad time that day. Very Old Engines is next, which happens to be one of my favorite Railway series books. Not gonna lie, I feel like it gets forgotten a lot, and it's far overdue for an adaptation. The story sees the origins of Skarloey and Rheneas. I love the era of Sodor before the book started, so getting to see the years before Thomas is always a treat. I also love their cabless designs. I wish Ertl made variants of these guys. I would have 100% already had them in my collection by now. This would be a fitting end to the narrow gauge railway, and I specifically made sure it ends with this book so the model team could get some mileage out of the Ivo Hugh prop. Now, as mentioned before, this season will only be 20 episodes just like season 6. This season would have came out in 2004 just like the original, so we're almost out of stories to adapt. Personally, I feel like in this timeline Christopher would have still taken a long break, but would have returned to at least give us more books to fill out the remaining 8 episodes that were missing. Now, the next 4 in the season are kind of filler spots. They're one-offs in that sense, where all their partner stories were already adapted years ago. First up is Drip Tank. The resolution was kind of already done in season 2, but it's just a run-of-the-mill Thomas and Percy story. All you need is to have them get mad at one another and make up. Next would be Thomas and the Evil Diesel. It is a crime that this story was never adapted. Diesel became such an important character in the years following this, so him never having a real reason why he stayed on Sodor always bugged me, and this would finally explain that. I love this story to bits, and you know what? I've never done anything like this, but if this video gets 100 likes, I'll do a full remake of the story. To follow that up, I would then hit you with the Kobe and LeBron of season 7. That's right, Gordon Goes Foreign and Super Rescue. These stories never got a chance to shine in the OG series, so now they can finally get what they've always deserved. And to finish off the series, we have the Fat Controllers Engines. Just a perfect send-off for the season and possibly the entire series. Getting all the props to recreate the iconic shot from Golden Jubilee would just be amazing, and I pray for the day we ever get a reference to it in official media. And so, the series would end with the engines being reminded of how much of a credit they are to Sir Topham Hatt as they whistle in celebration. While we're here, I want to touch up on some other options in this timeline. Like I mentioned, the last 2 seasons were short. However, they could easily find some stories to help fill up the remaining slots. Thomas and the Hurricane was originally a part of season 7, but I completely forgot about Gordon Goes Foreign. They could also expand on some of the stories found in Bad Days for Thomas and his friends. However, I felt like the 20 episode count fit the season since the last model season also only had 20 episodes. Also, I know some of you are already typing it, so once more, this season releases in 2004, so the last 2 books wouldn't be out yet. There is a chance Christopher wouldn't take such a long pause this time due to the contract, but I don't know. Maybe in season 8 we could have seen Barry. I don't know about you, but I would love to live in a world where we got this. Don't get me wrong, I love the original seasons, but getting to see Wilbur or even Pip and Emma in the model series is something I wish we could have gotten. The crew disrespecting Audrey's wishes after he passed always kind of rubs me the wrong way. The Reverend W. Audrey left behind a global phenomenon when he passed, and sadly never got to see it at its peak. I'll always love those seasons, Magic Railroad, and what came after, but personally, I would love to see the universe where we got to see and experience more of what the Audrey family wrote. And hopefully today, I was able to honor that legacy by spotlighting the remainder of their stories. And I wish that these stories got the respect that they deserve. However, sadly, because they weren't adapted, most of the public just isn't really aware of them, which sucks. Sorry to end the video on such a down note, it's just Audrey left behind an important legacy, and I think it's up to us to honor it. And I think as fans, through our remakes and adaptations, I think we're doing a good job. Anyways, ExpressMe64 signing off. Farewell.